My name is Adam, and I never thought I'd be sharing this story. But after what I experienced during my death, I realize I have no choice. If I stay silent, I'll be betraying everything I was shown, everything I now know to be true. I don't expect everyone to believe me. In fact, I know many won't. I would have doubted it myself once, but that doesn't change what happened. That doesn't change what I saw. It was supposed to be just another night. The kind of night where the exhaustion settles in deep, where you don't think beyond the next hour, the next red light, the next turn home. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, misting the roads and blurring the streetlights into soft halos. I had been working a double shift, running on little more than caffeine and routine. My wife, Amina, had texted me a simple reminder: don't be late. Samir wants to show you his drawing before bed. Samir, my little boy. 6 years old with a heart so open it scared me sometimes. Always sketching something, always asking the big questions about God, about life, about things I didn't always have the answers for. I imagined him waiting by the door, eyes bright with expectation, and I pressed the gas a little harder. Just a few more minutes and I'd be home. Just a few more minutes and I'd see him. I never made it. The moment came like a sharp intake of breath. A flicker of movement in my periphery, a set of headlights cutting through the rain, the gut punch realization that they were too close, coming too fast. The impact was violent, a deafening explosion of metal against metal, glass shattering like stars scattering across the night. My body jolted forward, the seatbelt biting into my chest, the world turning over and over, and then stillness, not just the absence of motion but something deeper. A silence so complete it felt like the entire world had been erased. I was aware before I was awake. A strange awareness, detached and weightless, as if the very concept of having a body had been left behind. My first thought was that I should be in pain, but there was none. No fear, no confusion, just a quiet, undeniable knowing that I was no longer where I had been. I saw myself before I understood what I was seeing. My car was crumpled beyond recognition, twisted metal barely holding shape. The windshield was fractured like a spider web, rain seeping in through the cracks, and inside, my body, still, motionless. I should have panicked. I should have screamed. But instead, I only watched. There was something surreal about it, like looking at an old photograph of yourself and feeling disconnected from the person in the image. That was me, but it wasn't. The scene around me moved with slow, deliberate clarity. The flashing lights of an ambulance, the blurred figures of paramedics rushing toward the wreckage. I heard their voices, distant but urgent. "We've got a pulse, but it's weak. Prep the stretcher, he's barely holding on." Holding on to what? I wasn't in that body anymore. I wasn't there at all. Then I felt it. A pull, not a physical force, but something deeper, something within me being drawn forward. The wreckage, the rain, the frantic voices, they all began to fade. The world around me stretched, blurred, dissolved into something else entirely. I wasn't falling. I wasn't flying. I was simply moving through a space that felt endless, a darkness that wasn't empty but full, pulsing with something I couldn't name. And then the light. It wasn't a tunnel, not in the way people describe. It wasn't a doorway or a beam. It was everywhere, surrounding me, within me, as if I had stepped into the very essence of existence itself. The warmth of it was unlike anything I had ever felt, not just on my skin, because I had no skin, but in the deepest part of me, in the places I had long forgotten existed. There was no fear. Only peace. A peace so vast and complete that for a moment I understood why people never wanted to leave this place once they arrived. I had no words, no voice, no body, but I knew something was there, watching, waiting, and then I heard him, a voice that wasn't sound but pure presence. It filled the space around me, filled me, resonating through every fiber of my being. The moment it reached me, I trembled, not out of fear but out of recognition. I knew this voice. I had never heard it before, yet I had always known it. "Do not be afraid." The words weren't spoken. They simply were, imprinted onto my soul as if they had always been there, waiting to be remembered. And then the light shifted, coalescing into something more. A figure. He stood before me, radiant, clothed in a brilliance that was not of this world. His presence was overwhelming, not in size or stature but in truth. Looking at him was like looking into the deepest part of my own soul and seeing it reflected back in its purest form. Every barrier, every doubt, every question I had ever carried melted in his presence. I fell to my knees without realizing it, not because I had chosen to, but because my very being knew who he was, Jesus. I had never spoken his name like this before, not with certainty, not with understanding. As a Muslim convert, I had respected him, honored him as a prophet. But this was something else. This was a knowing that went beyond titles, beyond doctrines. This was truth in its most undeniable form. He looked at me, and I felt as though every part of me was being seen, known, understood. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a sorrow so deep it felt like the mourning of the world itself. "You were brought here for a reason." I tried to speak, but there were no words, only thoughts, only a desperate why, echoing within me. He stepped closer and the space around us shifted. The light expanded and suddenly I was seeing. Not just this realm, but something else, something beyond. Visions. They came in flashes, images seared into my soul like fire on parchment. A world that looked like my own, yet wasn't. People, millions of them, moving through their lives blind to the darkness creeping around them. A deception so great it wove itself into the very fabric of their existence, making them believe they were free while they were bound in chains they couldn't see. Families torn apart. Faith traded for convenience. Truth distorted beyond recognition. A chill ran through me, though I had no body to feel it. What is this? I thought, or perhaps I spoke, or maybe it was all the same here. Jesus' eyes held mine, sorrow deepening. "The world as it is," he said. "And the world as it will be." And then the vision shifted again. I wanted to turn away, but there was nowhere to go. The vision pulled me in, refusing to let me look away from the truth unfolding before me. I saw cities, towering and bright, filled with people moving as if in a trance. Their eyes were empty, their faces expressionless, and yet they smiled, smiles that never reached their eyes. Screens flickered all around them, messages pouring in, consuming their attention, their thoughts, their very souls. I watched as families sat in the same room yet never spoke. Children stared at glowing devices while their parents scrolled endlessly, their minds elsewhere, their hearts disconnected. A father walked past his son without acknowledging him. A mother sat beside her child yet never looked up. They were together, yet utterly alone. And then a shift. The screens weren't just distractions. They were something more. The people weren't just watching them, they were becoming them. Their thoughts, their beliefs, their very sense of reality was being shaped, rewritten, controlled. They believed they were free, but they were puppets, their strings pulled by something unseen. I wanted to scream at them, to shake them, to tell them to wake up, but they wouldn't have heard me. They had already surrendered. Then the vision twisted again, and I saw places of worship, mosques, churches, synagogues, but something was wrong. The prayers were empty, spoken out of habit rather than faith. Leaders stood before their congregations, preaching messages that sounded right but carried no truth. Words of peace, unity, love, yet stripped of their meaning, twisted into something hollow. And then a shadow. It moved through the crowds, unseen but present. A force so subtle, so deceptive that even the most faithful did not recognize it. It whispered in their ears, wrapped itself around their hearts. It did not demand their devotion. It made them offer it willingly. They thought they were serving righteousness, but they were blind to the chains being wrapped around them. Even those who still held to their faith began to falter. Doubt crept in. What if they had been wrong? What if the truth they had followed was too rigid, too outdated? Slowly, they compromised, softened their convictions, made space for new beliefs that promised comfort, acceptance, progress. They did not see that they were trading truth for a lie. I turned to Jesus, my soul trembling. How can they not see? His face was sorrowful. Because they do not want to. I felt something inside me crack. The weight of what I was seeing crushed me. These people, they weren't strangers. They were my neighbors, my friends, my family, my own wife. My own son. No, I choked out. Not Samuel. The vision shifted again and I saw my boy. He was older, standing in a world I barely recognized. The glow of a screen reflected in his eyes. He was listening to voices that were not mine, that were not Amina's. His hands were empty, his gaze unfocused, and yet he nodded along as if being fed words he could no longer resist. I reached for him, desperate, but I had no hands, no body to grasp him with. I turned back to Jesus, pleading, but before I could speak, he raised a hand and the vision changed again. A war, not of weapons or armies, but of truth and lies. I saw those who resisted. Their voices were drowned out, their warnings ridiculed. They stood against the tide, but the tide was vast, relentless. Some fell, some were broken, and some endured. Their faith was not in systems or leaders, not in technology or progress. Their faith was in something greater. I saw them praying, not in grand buildings, not before cameras, but in secret, in small gatherings, in whispers, and in firelit rooms. They clung to the word, the true word, even as the world around them burned. They will be hated, Jesus said. They will be outcasts. They will suffer. I saw it. The rejection, the persecution. I saw families turn against one another, friendships shattered. The world would not understand them. The world would despise them, and yet they endured. They were weary but unshaken. They had nothing, yet they had everything. I didn't understand. Why do so few stand? Jesus' eyes, filled with an agony I could not comprehend, met mine. Because the deception is greater than they can imagine. A weight settled into my soul, heavy and unrelenting. Then how can they be saved? His voice was quiet but firm. They must remember my words. They must know me. The words sent a tremor through me. I thought of all the times I had spoken of faith but never truly lived it. The times I had prayed but not listened. The times I had searched for guidance but only accepted the answers that were comfortable. I had been blind too. Jesus stepped closer and I felt something surge through me. A love so deep it left me breathless. A sorrow so vast it nearly crushed me. The time is coming, he said. And even the faithful will be tested. A single tear slid down his cheek, and in that moment I understood. This was not just prophecy. This was certainty. It would happen. The vision around us began to dissolve, the light dimming, the pull of something familiar drawing me back. I panicked. No, I'm not ready. Jesus placed a hand over my heart. The warmth of it filled me, steadied me, even as I felt myself slipping away. You must tell them. And then the world shattered into darkness. I gasped as I was thrust back into my body, the sensation like being submerged in ice after basking in the sun. Pain, sharp and immediate, tore through me, my chest constricted, my limbs heavy as if I had been buried under a mountain. My lungs burned as I sucked in air, my throat raw and desperate. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled my nose, the distant beeping of machines anchoring me to the present. I was alive. Blurred figures moved around me. A voice, thick with relief, called my name. Adam, Adam, can you hear me? I turned my head, the movement sluggish, every muscle protesting. Amina's face came into view, her dark eyes wet with tears, her hijab slightly askew as if she had been running her hands through her hair in frustration. She clutched my hand so tightly it hurt, but I didn't care. You're back, she whispered, half disbelief, half prayer. Back. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me. My body was here, but my soul still trembled from where I had been. My lips parted, my mind scrambling for words, but how could I explain what I had seen? How could I put into words the weight of eternity, the vastness of truth, the sorrow in Jesus' eyes. I blinked, and suddenly, Samir's face appeared beside Amina's, his small hands gripping the edge of my hospital bed. His eyes were wide, his lip trembling. "Baba, you were sleeping for a long time." I reached out with weak fingers, brushing his hair back. He felt real, warm, alive. A choked sound escaped me. I had seen him older, lost, drifting into the world's deception. But here he was, my little boy, still whole. Tears pricked at my eyes. Not yet. A doctor appeared at my bedside, clearing his throat. "It's a miracle you survived, Mr. Khan. The crash was catastrophic. You were technically dead for nearly 5 minutes. We didn't think we'd get you back." 5 minutes. I had spent what felt like an eternity in that place, and here in the physical world only 5 minutes had passed. The doctor continued speaking, about internal bleeding, about the surgeries I had undergone, about the recovery ahead. But his words barely registered. My mind was still caught in the weight of what I had seen. When the doctor left, Amina smoothed her hand over mine. "You scared me," she said softly. "I thought I lost you." I squeezed her fingers, my voice hoarse. I hesitated. How could I say it? Where could I even begin? She searched my face, her brows knitting together. "What is it?" I swallowed. I saw something." Her breath hitched. "Saw?" I hesitated, but then Samir spoke up, his little voice cutting through the heavy air. "Did you see Allah Baba?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. The truth sat heavy in my chest, pressing against my ribs. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Not here in a hospital room under fluorescent lights. This was something too big, too sacred. So I did the only thing I could. I pulled Samir into my arms, ignoring the pain lancing through my body, and whispered, "I saw something beautiful." He let out a breath of relief, nodding as if that was all he needed to hear. But Amina, she wasn't convinced. Her gaze lingered on me, studying the way my hands trembled, the way my breathing hitched. She knew me too well. She knew something had changed, and she was right. I wasn't the same man who had gotten into that car hours ago. That man had died on a rain-slicked road, crushed between metal and glass. The man who had returned was someone else entirely. I closed my eyes, Jesus' words echoing in my mind. "You must tell them." But how could I? Who would believe me? The world was already asleep. Would they even hear me if I called out to wake them? I didn't know, but I did know one thing. I couldn't stay silent. The days that followed felt like walking between two worlds. My body was here, aching, healing, but my soul was somewhere else, still reeling from what I had seen. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back there, standing in that vision, watching the world fall into deception, feeling the sorrow in Jesus' voice. His words pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I had to tell them, but tell them what? That I had died and returned. That I had seen Jesus. That everything we thought we knew was already slipping through our fingers. That the world was being lulled into a slumber so deep they wouldn't realize they were lost until it was too late. The moment I tried to shape the words, doubt coiled around me. Would they listen? Would she listen? Amina sat by my bedside every day, her fingers gently massaging my hand, her lips moving in silent prayer. I wanted to reach for her, shake her, tell her everything, but every time I opened my mouth, my tongue felt heavy, my throat dry. What if she thought I was crazy? What if I was crazy? The doctor said I had lost a lot of blood, suffered from oxygen deprivation. Maybe my mind had conjured it all in some desperate attempt to make sense of dying. Maybe I had imagined Jesus, imagined his voice, imagined his sorrow. But no, it had been too real. More real than this hospital room. More real than the beeping of the monitors or the distant sound of nurses talking in the hallway. That place, those visions, his words, they were carved into me, deeper than memory, deeper than thought. On the fourth night, when the hospital had grown quiet, I finally spoke. "Amina." She looked up from her phone, startled. "You're awake." She smiled, but there was worry in her eyes. "Do you need water?" I shook my head. "I need to talk to you," she straightened, setting her phone aside. "Of course, what is it?" My pulse hammered. I had imagined this moment so many times, rehearsed what I would say, but now that I was here, the words tangled in my throat. I licked my lips, my mouth dry. When I was gone, I saw something. Amina's face softened with understanding. "You had a vision." I hesitated, searching her eyes. "I died, Amina." She inhaled sharply, and for a moment she just looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I know," she whispered. "They told me your heart stopped, but you came back." I swallowed. "Yes, but not before I saw," my voice faltered. "Say it." "I saw Jesus." The air between us turned heavy. Amina didn't move, didn't blink. For a long moment she just stared at me, as if waiting for me to say something else, something that made sense. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "You were unconscious," she said carefully. "You were injured, Adam." "Your mind." "I wasn't dreaming," I said, my voice stronger now, the conviction taking hold. "It wasn't a hallucination. I was there. I met him." Amina's lips pressed into a thin line. "You were raised Muslim. You are Muslim." I didn't know how to answer that, was I? I had spent my whole life praying the way I had been taught, believing in the words given to me. But standing before Jesus in that place, feeling the power of his presence, I had known, not in the way I had known facts or memorized prayers, but in my soul. He was the truth. I reached for Amina's hand. "I know this is hard to hear, but I need you to listen." Her fingers were stiff in mine. "I am listening." But there was fear in her voice now. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "He showed me something, a vision, of the world, of what's coming. People think they're free, but they're not. They're being led into something dark, something dangerous, and they don't even see it." Amina swallowed, looking away. "Adam," I tightened my grip. "You know I wouldn't lie about this." Her breath was shaky. "No, but you were dead, Adam." "Maybe your mind." I saw our son. That made her flinch. I pushed forward, desperate now. I saw him older, lost, following the world, listening to voices that weren't ours, weren't God's, and I couldn't reach him. My voice broke. "Amina, he was slipping away." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Don't." But I couldn't stop. I saw people being led away from the truth. I saw faith twisted into something else, something false. I saw even the strongest believers questioning what they once knew. I saw people turning away because they thought they were doing what was right, but they were being deceived. I swallowed hard. Even the faithful will be tested, and most won't even realize they're failing. Amina was trembling now. She pulled her hand away from mine, pressing it to her mouth. "I don't understand," she whispered. I exhaled, my chest aching. "Neither do I, not completely, but I know this: I was sent back to warn them." I met her eyes. "To warn you." Silence. Amina sat frozen, her shoulders stiff, her gaze distant. The weight of what I had just said lingered between us, thick, suffocating. Then quietly she asked, "Why you?" I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I don't know." Her head dipped, her hands gripping the fabric of her dress. I don't," she shook her head. "I need time." I nodded, my throat tight. "I know." But we didn't have time. And that was the part that terrified me most. The days blurred together in a haze of pain and silence. Amina was still here, physically, but I could feel the distance growing between us, like a fault line widening beneath our feet. She went through the motions, bringing me water, adjusting my pillows, helping me shift when the pain was too much. But the warmth was gone. The way she looked at me now wasn't the same. She was afraid, not of me, but of what my words meant. I couldn't blame her. If our roles were reversed, I wasn't sure how I would react either. But the urgency inside me wouldn't let go. The moment I closed my eyes, I was back there, hearing his voice, seeing the world unravel. The deception wasn't coming. It was already here, curling its fingers around people's hearts, tightening its grip. And no one could see it. I had to tell them. But I had to start with her. On the 6th night, when the hospital was quiet and only the dim glow of a single overhead light filled the room, I tried again. "Amina." She was sitting in the chair by the window staring out at the darkened city. She didn't turn. "You need to rest. So do you." She let out a small, tired laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I can't." I shifted slightly, wincing. "Because of what I told you." She didn't answer, but I already knew. Carefully, I reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "I need you to believe me." Her grip tightened. "I don't know what to believe." She finally turned, her face lined with exhaustion. "You're my husband, I trust you, but this is too much, Adam." "I know," I said softly, "but it happened." She studied me, searching for something, maybe for any hint that I was still the man she knew, the man she had built a life with. "You said you saw him." I nodded. She hesitated. "What did he look like?" I sucked in a breath, trying to put into words something that couldn't be captured. "Not like the paintings, not like the stories. He was light and fire and something more. When he spoke, it wasn't just sound, it was truth. It was like my soul already knew him, like I had always known him, but never understood until that moment." Amina shivered. "And he told you the world is being deceived?" "Yes." She looked down at her lap. "And you think it's happening now?" I thought of the vision, of people blindly following, of faith being reshaped into something else, something twisted. "I don't think," I whispered. "I know." A long silence stretched between us. Then finally she asked, "What are you going to do?" My stomach clenched. "Tell people." Her head snapped up. "You'll ruin everything." I stiffened. Her voice wavered. "Your job, our friends, our family." "Do you know what will happen if you start talking about this?" I did. I would be mocked, dismissed, maybe worse. My own community would turn their backs on me. I could lose everything, our stability, our respect, even my safety. But how could I stay silent? I squeezed her hand. "Amina, if you had seen what I saw, you wouldn't be able to keep quiet either." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want to lose you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You won't." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if it was true, because deep down I knew this was just the beginning. The day I was discharged from the hospital, the air felt different. It wasn't just the physical weight of my injuries or the exhaustion clinging to my bones. It was the sense that I had stepped back into a world that no longer fit me. Everything outside looked the same. The cars in the parking lot, the endless motion of the city, the hum of life continuing as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. I had died. I had seen. And now I was here, carrying a truth I didn't know how to hold. Amina walked beside me in silence, her hand gripping the handle of my wheelchair. She hadn't spoken much since that night. I could feel her turmoil, the way she was trying to balance love and fear, faith and doubt. When we reached the car, she finally spoke. "I don't want you to say anything yet." I turned to look at her. "Amina." "Not yet," she said firmly. "Not until you've had time to heal. Think, please." My chest ached, not just from the accident but from the plea in her voice. She wasn't just worried about me, she was terrified of what speaking out would do to us. I nodded, though every part of me wanted to fight. She exhaled, relieved, and helped me into the car. The ride home was quiet. The city blurred past the window, headlights streaking through the evening haze. I stared at the people on the sidewalks, wondering how many of them felt the pull in their souls. How many of them sensed that something was shifting beneath their feet, or were they already too far gone to notice? When we pulled into our driveway, I saw my son's face pressed against the living room window. His small hands smudged the glass as he watched, his dark eyes wide. The moment Amina opened the car door, he ran outside, his feet pounding against the pavement. "Baba!" Pain flared through my ribs as I knelt, but I didn't care. I opened my arms and he crashed into me, his little body shaking. "I thought you weren't coming back," he whispered. I held him tighter. "I did, buddy, I did." Amina stood behind us, watching. I met her gaze over our son's head, and for the first time in days I saw something other than fear. I saw relief, but also uncertainty. That night, after we put our son to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at my hands. They looked the same, solid, real, but I felt like a stranger in my own body. I needed to do something. I needed to tell someone. Reaching for my phone, I hesitated before dialing. The call rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Adam, brother, is that you?" "Yusuf," I said, my voice rough. "I need to talk to you." A pause. Then, "Are you okay?" I exhaled. "No," silence. Then finally, "Come to the mosque tomorrow, we'll talk." I hesitated, my grip tightening on the phone. The mosque. The place I had prayed, learned, belonged. The place where my entire former understanding of faith had been built. Could I really go back there now, knowing what I knew? "Okay," I said. But something inside me whispered that after tomorrow, there would be no turning back. The mosque felt both familiar and foreign as I stepped inside the next day. The scent of worn carpets and faint traces of oud hung in the air, stirring memories of years spent bowing in prayer. Seeking guidance in the very place I now approached with a heart divided. Yusuf stood near the entrance, his face lined with concern as he watched me. "Adam." He embraced me carefully, mindful of my injuries. "Alhamdulillah, you're okay." I swallowed, uncertain how to respond. I wasn't sure if I was okay. He led me to a quiet corner, away from the men gathering for the noon prayer. The low murmur of Arabic verses filled the space, grounding me in something familiar, yet I felt like an outsider in my own skin. Yusuf sat across from me. "Tell me what's going on." I hesitated. Where did I even begin? That I had died. That I had seen something that shattered my understanding of reality. That I had met someone I never thought I would. But I had to start somewhere. So I told him. I told him about the accident, the moment my body failed, the instant my soul left the world. I described the light, the overwhelming presence, the voice that wasn't just heard, it was felt. My hands trembled as I recounted the vision, the warning, the deception gripping the world like a vice. And then I said it. "I saw him, Yusuf." His expression didn't change at first. He stayed silent, absorbing every word. But the moment I said his name, something flickered in his eyes, something unreadable. "Who?" His voice was quiet, almost careful. I met his gaze. "Jesus." Yusuf stiffened. The weight of the name sat heavy between us. He exhaled, rubbing his hands over his face before lowering them to his lap. "Adam, do you understand what you're saying?" "Yes." He studied me for a long time. "And you're certain?" I nodded. "It wasn't a dream, Yusuf. It wasn't my imagination. I know what I saw. I know who I spoke to." His jaw tightened. "And he told you," he hesitated, "that the world is being deceived." "Yes." Yusuf leaned back, pressing his fingers to his temples. The distant hum of voices and footsteps filled the silence between us. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. "Adam, you know this isn't something you can just say out loud. People will," he trailed off, his expression clouded. "People will what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "They'll call you a liar, a madman, or worse." He exhaled sharply. "Brother, you have a family to think about. A reputation. Do you understand how dangerous this is?" Anger flickered beneath my skin, not at Yusuf, but at the truth in his words. "You think I don't know that?" My voice was low, steady. "You think I want this? That I haven't thought about what it could cost me? Then don't do this." His voice was almost pleading. "Let it go." I stared at him. "Would you?" Silence. His expression shifted, something like pain crossing his face. He looked down, exhaling through his nose. "I don't know," he admitted. For the first time since I woke up in the hospital, I saw it, the sliver of doubt in him, the quiet question beneath the surface. He didn't believe me, not yet, but something in him wasn't dismissing it either, and that was enough. I reached across the space between us, gripping his wrist. "Just listen," I said. "Just consider that maybe things aren't what we've always thought they were." Yusuf's throat bobbed as he swallowed. The call to prayer rang out, filling the room with its sacred cadence. Around us, men began moving toward the prayer area, rolling out their mats, aligning their rows. Yusuf glanced toward them, then back at me. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, "but I'll listen." And for now, that was enough. The days that followed were filled with tension, not just in my own heart, but in the space between Amina and me. It was subtle at first, the way she became distant again, as though she couldn't reconcile the man she loved with the one who was carrying this heavy truth. I could see it in the way she avoided my eyes when I spoke about the vision, the way she stayed up late, staring into the dark as if waiting for the world to make sense again. And I couldn't blame her. I felt the same way. Each night after my conversation with Yusuf, I found myself lost in thought, replaying every detail of the encounter with Jesus, every word he spoke, and the weight of what I had seen. But no matter how much I tried to understand it, something about it remained just out of reach, like a half-remembered dream that refused to stay in focus. Yet the urgency to share the message never wavered. Even in the quiet moments of doubt, I knew I had no choice. The vision was not just a warning, it was a call. I could feel it in my bones, in my very soul. The truth was out there, but so was the deception, and time was running out. One evening, as I sat in the living room, Amina finally broke the silence. She came over to where I was sitting, her face drawn with exhaustion, and her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "I need to know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you believe now, Adam?" I looked at her, my heart aching. She was searching for something in me, something that had been lost. The certainty I had once held in my faith was now clouded by the enormity of what I had experienced. How could I explain that? How could I put words to the fear and awe I felt, knowing the world I thought I understood was a lie? "I don't know," I said honestly, running a hand through my hair. "But I know this, Amina, what I saw. It was real, and it's not just about me, it's about all of us. The deception is everywhere and we can't ignore it anymore, not if we want to protect what's left of our souls." Her gaze softened, but her voice trembled. "I've seen the way people look at you. I've heard the whispers behind our backs, and it scares me. It scares me because, what if you're wrong? What if everything we've believed for so long is a lie?" The words hit me like a physical blow. The fear in her voice echoed my own, fear of the unknown, fear of the truth that could break everything we had built together. But there was also something else in her eyes, something I hadn't seen before, a flicker of understanding. "I don't know if I'm wrong," I said quietly. "But I can't go back to what I was, to what we were." I took her hand in mine, squeezing it gently. "I need you to understand that. I need you to understand that this is something I can't ignore, even if it means losing everything else." Amina didn't answer right away. She stood there, her eyes fixed on me, as if she was trying to see through to the core of who I had become. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know if I can follow you on this, Adam, but I love you, I always will." And in that moment, I understood. We were at a crossroads, one where faith, love, and fear intersected. I had already made my choice, but she hadn't, and maybe she never would, not in the way I had. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty. I went to the mosque every day, still meeting with Yusuf, still trying to piece together the fragments of the vision. But as much as he tried to understand, he couldn't. He wasn't ready to see what I had seen. And every time I tried to explain it further, I could see the doubt in his eyes, real and heavy. It was then that I realized something. No one could truly understand this truth unless they saw it themselves. They had to experience it firsthand. The weight of it, the terror of it, the undeniable peace in the presence of something greater than everything else. Without that, there were no words that could make them believe. But I had no time to wait for others to catch up. I had already seen too much. I couldn't help but feel like a man alone in a storm, shouting for help no one was ready to hear. One night, just as I was about to fall asleep, the voice returned. "Tell them." It wasn't the same voice from before, the one full of compassion and sorrow, but the same presence, the same undeniable force. I felt it again, wrapping around me like a blanket, pulling me into something far bigger than myself. Tell them what you've seen, warn them, before it's too late. I woke in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The message was clear now. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was an instruction, and I had no more time to waste. I had to tell everyone. The next day, I drove to the city center, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I knew it was time to step forward to speak out, regardless of the consequences. I wasn't sure what I expected when I stood in front of the crowd that had gathered near the square, but the words tumbled from me before I could stop them. "I've seen the truth," I said, my voice shaking. "And it's not what you think. There's a deception growing stronger every day. But there is still hope, still time to change. I saw him, Jesus, and he's telling us that we cannot ignore what's happening. We cannot let ourselves be controlled by the lies." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some curious, others skeptical, and a few mocking. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. As I spoke, the faces before me became blurry, but one face stood out. A woman in the back, her eyes wide with disbelief, but something else, too, something like recognition. And that was when I knew. Even if no one else heard, even if I was ridiculed and dismissed, the message would be carried, one soul at a time. The truth was already taking root. The days following that moment were a blur, filled with both quiet reflection and the chaotic consequences of what I had done. Word spread quickly, as it always does in small communities, and soon I became a subject of intense scrutiny. Some people came to me with open hearts, seeking answers, while others turned their backs, avoiding eye contact as though simply being in my presence might contaminate their beliefs. Amina grew more distant, and Yusuf, while still trying to be supportive, seemed overwhelmed by the gravity of what I had shared. But despite the rejection, despite the whispered doubts and fearful glances, something in me had changed. A peace I couldn't explain began to settle in my chest. It wasn't the peace of certainty, nor the comfort of knowing everyone would accept me or my message. It was something deeper, something rooted in the very core of my being, a calm, knowing that I had done what I was meant to do. Amina's silence was becoming harder to bear, though. She was a good woman, and I knew her love for me ran deep. But I also knew that she was struggling, torn between the man she had married and the man I had become. Each time I tried to talk to her, to share more of what I had experienced, she would listen for a while but then retreat, as if afraid to let herself believe. One night, I decided to try once more. The house was quiet, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound filling the stillness. I found her in the kitchen, standing at the counter, staring at a half-empty cup of tea as if it held all the answers she needed. "Amina," I said softly, my voice breaking the silence. "Please talk to me." She didn't look up immediately. She just stood there, her hands wrapped tightly around the cup. The seconds stretched, and I could feel the tension building, suffocating the space between us. Finally, she exhaled, setting the cup down with a soft clink, and turned to face me. "I don't know who you are anymore, Adam," she said, her voice a mixture of sorrow and frustration. "I want to believe you, I do. But everything you've told me, everything you're saying, it's like you've stepped into a world I don't understand. I don't know how to follow you into it." Her words pierced through me. The love she had always shown me, the life we had built together, seemed to be slipping away, just out of reach. I took a step toward her, but she held up a hand, stopping me in my tracks. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of what you're becoming, Adam, and I'm scared of what's coming. What if you're wrong? What if you've misunderstood everything?" I could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty that had taken root in her heart. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about the vision I had seen or the message I had received. It was about us, about the foundation of our relationship, our family. And if I couldn't bring her along with me, if I couldn't show her the truth in a way that spoke to her soul, then everything I had fought for would be in vain. I reached out, gently touching her arm, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm not asking you to follow me blindly, Amina. I'm asking you to see what I've seen, to listen to what I've heard. I'm asking you to take a step into the unknown with me because I can't do this alone, but I need you to trust me." Her eyes filled with tears and she shook her head slightly. "I want to, Adam. I want to believe in you. But I need time. I need to find my own way to understand what you've seen. I need to come to it on my own or it won't mean anything to me." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. I couldn't force her to accept this truth, but I also knew I couldn't walk away from it. Not now. Not when the message was so clear, so urgent. "I'll wait," I said quietly. "I'll wait for you to find your way, but I can't turn back from what I know. Not anymore." She nodded, her expression softening as she stepped into my arms. We stood there for a long moment, holding each other, both of us lost in the vastness of what lay ahead. The following days were difficult. I continued to speak to anyone who would listen, warning them of the deception that was taking hold of the world, sharing the message I had received from Jesus. Some were receptive, some were not. But as I spoke, I began to realize something. This wasn't just about convincing people with words. It was about showing them, through my actions, through my love, through my unwavering faith, that the truth I carried was real. And then, one afternoon, I received a call that would change everything. It was Yusuf. His voice, when he spoke, was filled with a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "Adam, I've been thinking about everything you said, and I think I've seen it too." I sat up straighter, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I've been praying, Adam, really praying, and it's like something shifted. I don't have all the answers, but I felt it. The truth you've been telling me, it's starting to make sense. I can't deny it anymore." A rush of emotion flooded through me, relief, hope, and gratitude. Yusuf, the man who had doubted me most, was now seeing what I had seen. "Yusuf, this is it," I said, my voice breaking. "This is what we've been waiting for. The truth is reaching the hearts it's meant to, but we need to act. We can't let it slip away." "I know," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "We need to prepare. We need to warn everyone. Time is running out." I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. The pieces were falling into place, but the journey ahead was still uncertain. Amina, Yusuf, and I together had a responsibility now. A mission. We had seen the truth and now we had to share it, no matter the cost. As the sun set that evening, I stood in the quiet of the night, looking up at the stars, and I knew one thing for certain. The world was on the brink of something immense, something that would shake everything to its core, and I had a role to play in it. The message had been given, and now it was up to us to carry it forward, faithfully, fearlessly, and without hesitation. The final days before the storm hit were filled with an eerie stillness, a sense that everything had been building to this moment, but no one could quite see it. I could feel it in my bones, the tension, the weight of it all. Every conversation, every prayer, every interaction seemed to carry the echo of something bigger, something that couldn't be ignored. Amina had started coming with me to the gatherings, though she was quiet, withdrawn. She would sit in the back, her eyes focused on the floor, not quite ready to embrace what was unfolding. But she was there, and that meant everything to me. We were still tethered, still connected, despite the doubts and the confusion that hung between us like a shadow. Yusuf and I had become closer in the past few weeks, a bond forged not just in faith but in the shared understanding of what we had seen. He was no longer just a mentor to me. He had become a fellow traveler on this uncertain path, someone who saw the truth with the same clarity I did. Together, we spent hours discussing the messages, the signs, the urgency of what we were meant to do. We spoke of the deception we had seen spreading like a sickness, of the way people were being lured into a false sense of security, only to be blindsided by a greater evil. But as time passed, a dark cloud began to form over us. The authorities, the people in power, began to take notice. They couldn't ignore what was happening any longer. The more I spoke, the more eyes turned toward me, and not all of them were filled with curiosity or understanding. Some were filled with something far darker: fear, suspicion, and the kind of control that could only come from those who had too much to lose. One night, as I was walking home from a late meeting, I felt it, the feeling that something was wrong. The streets were too quiet, the air too still. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder as if I could sense someone following me, though no one was there. A shiver ran down my spine, and I knew, in the deepest part of my gut, that something was coming. The next morning, the world exploded. I woke to the sound of sirens, to the sight of flashing lights cutting through the dawn. The news was everywhere, on the radio, on television, on the screens of every device. People were in chaos, scrambling for answers. But the answers they were getting were lies. Lies designed to control, to distract, to lead them away from the truth that had been right in front of them all along. I watched, numb, as the reality of it settled in. The world I had once known, the world I had tried so hard to protect, was crumbling before my eyes. The deception was no longer something I could warn people about. It had already taken root, spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. And then, the phone call came. It was Yusuf. His voice was frantic, full of panic, and it cut through the noise of the world around me. "Adam, they're coming for you. They're coming for all of us. You have to hide. You have to get out of here, now." I froze, my mind reeling. For a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. I had been expecting resistance, but this was something else entirely. They were coming for me, for the message I had shared, for the truth I had carried back from the other side. I had known it was possible, even inevitable, but hearing it in Yusuf's voice made it feel all too real. I didn't have time to think, to process. I grabbed my bag, shoved a few belongings inside, and rushed out the door, the weight of everything I had learned, everything I had experienced, pressing down on me like a physical force. I ran, not knowing where to go, just knowing I couldn't stay in one place any longer. The city was in turmoil, with people rioting in the streets, fighting for control over a world that was slipping away from them. The deception had taken root so deeply that even now, as they scrambled for answers, the truth was still hidden from them. I found myself on the outskirts of the city, standing at the edge of a cliff, staring out at the dark horizon. It felt like the world was ending, like the storm I had seen in my vision was finally here. And yet, in the midst of the chaos, there was something else, something deeper, something unshakable, a feeling of peace. The peace I had felt before when I had been with Jesus returned to me now. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The same presence that had guided me all along, the same love that had carried me through the darkest moments. It was here now in the midst of all this fear and confusion. It was here, and it was calling me forward. I closed my eyes, my heart full, and whispered a prayer of surrender, a prayer of trust. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know how this story would end. But I knew one thing for sure: the truth I had been given was real. And no matter what happened, it was worth fighting for. The days that followed were a blur of movement, of hiding and running, of trying to stay one step ahead of those who sought to silence me. But the message I carried wasn't something that could be silenced, no matter how hard they tried. It was a flame that burned in my soul, and I wasn't about to let it die out. As I moved from place to place, I continued to share the message, telling anyone who would listen. I told them what I had seen, what I had been shown. I told them that Jesus had spoken to me, that he had given me a mission to warn them, to help them see the truth before it was too late. But even as I spoke, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. The world was changing, and not everyone would be ready for it. The deception would continue to grow, the lies would continue to spread, and there would be those who would turn away from the truth, just as they always had. But there would also be those who would listen, those whose hearts were open to the message, those who would see the light, even in the darkest of times. And so I kept going. I kept moving, kept sharing, kept speaking the truth. Because I knew that no matter how dark the world became, the light I had been given would never go out. If this story moved you, please share it and help others stay vigilant and faithful. The truth is out there, and it's up to us to keep the light burning.